Hello landlords, it's Ernie Garcia, landlord attorney. Today we're talking all about what you can do if you come across a serial squatter, someone who's on your property without your authorization, just stepped on in and assumed possession. What do you do when you find this on your property? We're going to talk about that today. Let's get started. Well, more and more we're hearing stories from landlords who talk about a particular property that is simply sat unoccupied while they're looking for the next tenant, and then all of a sudden the landlord comes upon the property and finds that someone is now occupying that property. In the state of Texas, when someone has established residency, they've taken some real property and now they live there. Once that residency is established, the only way to remove them, even if they took the property through an illegal means, the only way to remove them is through the eviction process. And while this may be terribly unfair for landlords, this is the current state of the law, and landlords need to know that in these situations, the law is limited in what can be done quickly. For those of you who've watched any of the other videos that I've put out, you know that eviction is anywhere from a 30 to 45 day process, longer if there's an appeal. Today we'll watch an interview with a landlord who came upon a serial squatter, and we're going to see exactly what she did right and what she did wrong.
Well, I had no idea why there might be a dog on my house for sale. So I drove over there, and sure enough, there was a dog with babies. And at that point, I was just incredibly puzzled. And so I started to open the back door with my key. And at that point, it dawned on me that the house could have people in it and that I might place myself in danger if I simply walked into the house. So instead of opening the back door, I dialed 911 and had a conversation with the police and explained the situation.
So first of all, if you see signs that someone has occupied the premises, you see a car, you see pets, you see curtains in the window that didn't have curtains before, all these are indications that the property is probably occupied. And if that's the case, you have to assume as you come onto the property that there will be people there. Now, it's possible that you show up and everybody's out to work and you come upon an empty residence, but you may find children there, you may find adults there, and because of these things, it's advisable for you not to go alone. Definitely don't show up to a situation like this all by yourself. If you have a suspicion that someone has occupied your property, even if it's without your authorization, that doesn't make you more likely to get a result. It makes it less likely, because people who know how to occupy property this way know exactly what they're doing. They know what the law says, and they know that you will be unable to physically remove them once they have established residency. So if you plan to investigate a scene like this, make sure that you go with someone else. Preferably someone who can document the thing, not just by seeing and hearing everything that goes on, but by gathering video evidence of what transpires. As far as dialing 911, this is not an emergency situation, so we don't recommend that you dial 911. In Texas, you might call a constable. And the reason you would call the constable as opposed to the city police is because, generally speaking, in Texas counties, it's the constables who handle landlord-tenant matters, particularly those having to do with eviction. And so the constable's office is going to have more experience with these situations, and they might offer some helpful advice to you as to where you can and cannot cross a certain line when it comes with real property. The fact that you suspect that someone is there illegally, or the fact that you know that someone is there illegally, doesn't necessarily change your authority. The rules are what they are, and we have to live within those rules. And because of that, it's helpful to have somebody there who understands those rules, like one of the constables.
As I was walking around to the front of the house to wait for the police, I think the tenants must have heard my voice, the squatters rather, must have heard my voice, and they came out. And it was two young women who told me that they had a lease to live there. And very quickly, she pulled up the lease on her phone, shows it to me. It was unsigned, as I could see it, and it was issued by a person whom I didn't know. And so I told her, I said, I'm really sorry to tell you this, but this house is not for rent. This person has no affiliation with me or my business partner, the owner of the home. And I'm really sorry. I think you must have been scammed. And she told me then and showed me a receipt that they had paid $3,100 in first month rent, pet fee, and a deposit. And then she indicated that it was for rent on Zillow. Well, I own the listing on Zillow. And so I knew that it was listed for sale. And had anything been altered on that, you'll get an email from Zillow saying that your listing's been altered. I had not received anything like that. I then looked it up on Zillow and it was not for rent.
So the landlord in this situation has done a couple of things right. The first of them is she asked to see the lease. She asked to see the proof of payment. I think both of these are good ideas whenever you have someone who is purporting to have a valid lease. Now, the fact that it remains unsigned is good evidence for you that they didn't have a reasonable expectation that they actually completed the lease agreement, that they actually executed a proper lease. Doesn't mean that that's going to win the day, but this is all helpful information. And so if the tenant says, hey, I've got this lease on my phone, you say, great, why don't you send a copy of it over to me so I can review it. I'm the owner. I'm not sure where the mix-up was, but if you can get a hold of any of this information, that's going to be helpful to you. In this case, the landlord also got a copy of a handwritten receipt that seemed to indicate that rent and a deposit and a pet fee were each paid. It's unclear exactly how much went to each, but it looks as though they've got a receipt. And so it's important to be able to log these things as evidence of future fraud, particularly if you later mean to file a criminal complaint against these particular people. But you have to assume maybe they're being forthright and maybe they were taken advantage of, because that's what the law assumes. The law presumes that everybody is innocent, that no one is in breach until a party can prove that that's the case. But that's the kicker. When people know that the burden to prove these things falls on another party, they can go along and pretend by coming up with a receipt, which is easily drafted on a receipt book you can get clearly from Office Depot or any other office store. And then you can draft a lease, because there's tons of them on the internet, and then purport to, you can even have it signed by both parties. And so that is some evidence that perhaps they themselves have been taken advantage of, even if it's not true. Landlords, I know you're getting value out of today's video. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, please don't hesitate to give us a like. If you're not subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. If you're not a member of our Facebook group, Texas Landlords, we welcome you to check us out on Facebook. We're on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok. Look for our content all over social media. We look forward to hearing from you. Now, one thing that this landlord doesn't do that I would have recommended is send a notice to the tenant saying, by the way, here's a copy of my deed. A deed is public information, so you're not really giving away anything private. But here's a copy of my deed as proof that I own this place. I know nothing about whoever the landlord is in your lease. So for the future, all rent in accordance with this lease belongs to me. If you have a question for that landlord, or that landlord has a question for you, you can send them to me. I'll be happy to talk to them. But all future rent should come to me. And the reason this is important is because we know that future rent won't come to you. And if it turns out you're at the end of a rental month, well, now you can sue them for non-payment of rent in accordance with the lease, which technically you own. It's associated with your property, and it has everything to do with your property, and so you're entitled to the proceeds from that contract. Whether a court's going to buy that or not, whether the court's going to enforce it or not, you have it as something you can use, and perhaps something you can use to prompt that tenant to vacate, as opposed to wasting their money on a lease where they were scammed. At this point, you haven't antagonized the tenant. You simply inform them of your rights. You simply inform them of the fact that whoever this landlord was, they had no legitimate rights to this, but that any future rent should come to you if they plan to stay. You can give them the option to go, absolutely, but if they stay, now they know that once a new rent month has started, they don't have a legitimate claim to pay the other guy. You have a legitimate claim to collect from them, and that opens up other doors of claims that you would have against them in the eviction process. Again, it might also serve as a good prompting for them to say, oh, well, yeah, we were taken advantage of. I can't believe this. And you say, yeah, it's unfortunate. You can sue that guy. Feel free to. But yes, if you're going to stay, you're going to owe rent here. The one complication for this particular landlord is that she took things into her own hands before she hired any attorney, and she made a few mistakes. Here's one.
But that second day, I drove by and I saw that the front door was open. And so I stopped. I was alone. And I walked up to the sunroom porch and the dogs were gone. So I was feeling rather hopeful because that front door was 3/4 of the way open. So I knocked. I announced my presence in keeping with the fact that they have a right to privacy. And then I entered the sunroom porch and knocked on the front door as well and announced my presence. At that point in time, when I looked into the front door, I see that they're still there. I had pepper spray in my hand. They rushed to the front door and it immediately escalated.
You don't have every right to be in the house at all.
Ma'am.
You do not. You do not. Because according to my lease, me and my girlfriend owns the house. So I don't know what you need to take up with the police, whatever the case may be.
I own the house.
But yeah.
Okay.
No.
If you touch me,
I'm not touching you.
You are touching
No,
me,
I'm not.
and this lady is
I'm
touching
not.
me.
No, we're blocking you from coming in the house.
You
because
are.
you're doing too much.
This was not a good idea. It doesn't ever make sense to confront someone who, A, is either a victim of a huge scam. Again, if that's the case, then you don't need to get confrontational with them. You can explain yourself, as hopefully you've done in writing up until this point. But that's about it. Confrontation doesn't make sense. No good could possibly come out of it. But if they're criminals, and this is a fraudulent endeavor, why would you feel safe interacting with someone who clearly is not interested in following the law, who clearly is so brazen that they'll walk into somebody else's home and simply take over? If that's the case, what good could possibly come from you asserting your ownership when your ownership didn't stop them from coming in? Do you really think it's going to make them leave? Let's talk about the standard that Texas law requires of a landlord, even when there's a valid lease. It's really two parts. The landlord can generally enter, specifically if the lease allows it. Now, in this case, we don't know what the lease said about the landlord's right to enter or not. But that's irrelevant, because even if it says the landlord has a right to enter, to inspect, to make repairs, to show the property to other prospective tenants or potentially to people who might want to purchase the property, even if the lease said all of that, the law still prohibits this kind of interaction. It's just not legal. You cannot enter if your entry is first unreasonable. And so you really have to have a reason to be on the property. In this case, I don't know what her stated reason was. It may have been to inspect. It kind of looks like it was there to tell the people who were living there they shouldn't be living there. I don't know how valid a court would say that particular reason is, but if you do plan to enter, again, whether you have a tenant who signed a lease, whether you have an unauthorized occupant, if you do plan to enter, your basis must be reasonable. Now, reasonability also refers to the time that you go. So it would likely be unreasonable for you to show up at 2 in the morning. So do you have a reasonable basis to be there? And are you showing up at a reasonable time? In any case, if you're not being reasonable, you don't get in. Second, Texas law requires that you enter peacefully. And so if you come and knock on the door and they open the door and you say, "Hi, I'm Laura Landlord, and I'm here to enter peacefully into your home to conduct an inspection." And they say, "Come on in, Laura." Then you can enter peacefully, do what you got to do, and then leave. So you're showing up at a reasonable time for a reasonable purpose, and you're entering in peacefully. But even if you showed up at a reasonable time, and even if you have a reasonable purpose, if the peace is broken, you cannot enter, even if the tenant breaks the peace, or in this case, the unauthorized occupant. If there is no peace, you have to cease your right to enter. You just can't do it. Texas law doesn't allow you to do it if it's not reasonable and it's not peaceful. It basically comes down to this. You can't break the law in order to fix this situation. If you want the law to work for you, you also have to follow the law. And in this case, there are protections set up when someone has established residency. Those protections are serious, and the rules having to do with those protections have to be followed. If you fail to acknowledge that those rules exist, you're technically no better than the people who failed to acknowledge your ownership and took possession of property without permission. And so the law isn't going to help you in that situation. If you want to be on the right side of the law, you have to be on the right side of the law consistently. Now, as you might expect, you have some people who were strongly provoked, and we don't see every interaction that happened between these parties, but something tells me things got real sour real fast. Take a look at this.
They did $38,000 worth of damage to the inside of the home purely out of spite and anger. They destroyed walls and cabinets. They stole our washer dryer. They placed feces on the carpet and other places. They left food. They threw eggs on the walls and the flooring.
Criminals, am I right? So here's the thing. If they committed a criminal act to get possession of your most valuable asset, that rent property, and you go and you provoke them by getting in their face and telling them what's what, you can probably expect some kind of retaliation against you. If they are criminals and they've done this before, they may not care what condition they leave your property. They may not care of the consequences. They may not even be around for you to, do anything about it. And so if that's the case, it's, again, even more reason not to be confrontational. You can expect someone who's committed a crime, someone who's involved in a fraud, to not show respect to your property. In this case, it cost $38,000 worth of damage. Now, what can you do, again, without being confrontational, without trying to muscle people out of the property who don't belong there? What can you do to kind of set yourself up for minimal protection? I'm gonna give you a couple of pieces of advice if you come across a serial squatter who is on the property. One thing you can do is you can gather as much identifying information as you can. In this case, we have video. You may have their names, but maybe not. You definitely have access to any vehicles that they might have parked in the driveway. If so, take pictures of VIN numbers if you can, of license plates if you can. All that might ultimately be helpful. Not 100% absolute. Certainly the vehicles might not be titled in their names, or maybe were also stolen. Who knows? But if you can gather some of this identifying information, it may help you down the line. Again, it's not an end-all. It's not an absolute resolution here, but it is something you could potentially use down the line, again, if they criminally vandalize your property. Finally, in response to this kind of damage, you're going to want to file a claim with your insurance company. Now, for that to really matter, you would have to be insured for this kind of loss. If you're unsure whether you are insured for this kind of vandalism, you're going to want to go talk to your insurance company today and make sure that you have some kind of coverage in the event that someone occupies your property, whether it's rightful or wrongful. They occupy the property and through their vandalism cause excessive damage to your property that otherwise isn't normal, otherwise isn't just simple breach of the lease. This is premeditated, intentional damage to the property. All right, so how could you possibly prevent something like this from happening to you somewhere down the line? There's a couple of things you can do. The first one is don't leave property vacant for extended periods of time. Unfortunately, there are predatory people out there who are looking at property that has just remained vacant for a long time. If they've passed by it a few times and they see week after week, no one is there, people clearly don't live there, there's been a for sale sign out there for weeks, that's a target. And so if property remains vacant, unoccupied, and unvisited, it's a prime target for this kind of predator. So how do you protect yourself against something like this? Well, you can use technology to a certain degree to assist you. If you have a doorbell camera that you can leave set up, you would know who comes in and out of your property every single time. You can get alerts even on your cell phone that let you know when someone is coming in or coming out of your property. By having this device, you can save yourself from the headache of someone stepping in while you were away or without any knowledge on your part. Another piece of technology that you might find helpful is a smart thermostat. If you're able to regulate the temperature in the unit to a quite warm 85 degrees, you likely won't do any damage to any of the components of the home, but you'll make it prohibited from anybody who means to occupy the home, particularly during the summer months. And you can play with these numbers all you want, but by having a smart thermostat, you can cool it down in anticipation of someone coming in to view the property, and then raise the temperature back up when you know it is unoccupied and should remain unoccupied. As for locks, it appears that in this particular case, the key was in a lockbox. And so while that may be helpful for visiting realtors to come in and quickly access the property, it may be better for you to have a keyless entry system on your doors. If your front and back door have a keyless entry code that only you have access to, then it's likely that you can prevent someone from making the claim that some realtor gave them the key and issued a lease to them. If they don't have access to that code, they're just not getting in. And if they get in and remove that keyless entry system, it's going to be at severe damage to the property. And so this would easily be something that you could report as, again, breaking and entering. Now, when you see them come in on your doorbell camera and you see them fiddling with the lock itself, this is a good time to call the police to report a break-in. And so, these kinds of things can be remedied with certain technological devices. If you can get these installed, it's going to go a long way. But essentially what you need are eyes and ears. You may also employ the assistance of your neighbors. Get to know your neighbors. I always talk to landlords about their neighbors and the fact that neighbors can be an invaluable asset. They can let you know at an instant, hey, somebody's there who is checking out the house and it looks like they're moving in. Have you sold or leased this property? And so that might help you to get the ball rolling to prevent somebody from establishing residency and prevent somebody from moving in when they don't belong and prevent somebody from being forced to be evicted before you can get a hold of your property again. Landlords, don't be a victim of serial squatters. There are a number of things that you can do to take control of your property and make sure that no one finds you sleeping at the wheel, that you're able to always be hyper vigilant with your property because it is your most valuable asset in the landlord game. For additional videos about landlording, YouTube seems to think that this particular one is perfect for you. We invite you to check out all of our content. And until next time, landlords, happy leasing.